The last thing my grandfather said to me before I opened that barn door was, "You don't need to go in there." He didn't say it like a warning. He said it like a man who had already made peace with something I hadn't yet seen. My girlfriend, Raina, had been asking to meet my grandfather for almost a year. I'd been putting it off, not for any dramatic reason, just the usual excuses. Long drive, he doesn't like company, he's in his 80s, he gets tired easily. All of those things were true. None of them were the real reason. The real reason was something I'd never been able to name. A low-grade discomfort I felt every time I turned off Route 9 onto that gravel road, the kind that cuts through dead cornfields and doesn't show you the house until you're almost already there. I'd spent summers on that property as a kid. I loved my grandfather, but something about going back as an adult always sat wrong with me in a way I never examined too closely. We drove up on a Saturday morning in late November. The sky was the color of old dishwater, flat, gray, the kind of overcast that makes noon look like dusk. My girlfriend, Raina, had the heat cranked and was scrolling through her phone, half asleep, a gas station coffee in the cup holder between us. She was relaxed. I remember that specifically because of how quickly that changed. We arrived around 11:30. My grandfather was standing outside when we pulled up, which was unusual. He almost never came out until you knocked twice. He was wearing his old canvas work jacket and dark trousers, standing completely still near the side of the house, watching the car come up the drive. Not waving, just watching. I parked and got out and hugged him, and he hugged me back, but there was something rigid in it. He shook Raina's hand and said it was nice to meet her. Then he turned and walked inside without another word. "Is he always like that?" she murmured to me. "He's just old-fashioned," I said. She didn't respond. She just looked at the house for a long moment, the way you look at something when you're trying to figure out what it reminds you of before following me in. Inside, everything looked the same as it always had. The living room with its wood-paneled walls, the plaid couch, the shelf for Reader's Digest issues no one had touched in 30 years, the smell of wood smoke and something faintly medicinal. My grandfather put on a pot of coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table and made conversation. He asked about my job, asked about my drive down, gave short answers to everything we asked him. He wasn't rude, he was just careful, measured, like a man watching his words before he spent them. At some point, I asked where my grandmother was. He didn't answer right away. He picked up his mug and took a slow sip. "She's resting," he said. "Hasn't been feeling well." I nodded. She was 84. That made sense. But Raina caught my eye across the table. Just a look, quick, unreadable to anyone else. I glanced away. My grandfather excused himself after a while. Said he had some things to check on outside. The moment the back door shut behind him, Raina leaned across the table. "Something's off," she said quietly. "He's always like this. It's not him, it's your grandmother. We've been here over an hour. She hasn't made a sound. Nobody's checked on her. He hasn't offered to let us say hi, hasn't told us to keep it down so she can sleep. Nothing. She's resting. You told me she'd be the one hollering from the back of the house before we even got out of the car." She paused. "Those were your exact words." I didn't have a response to that. I told her she was overthinking it. She sat back and let it go, but she kept glancing at the hallway that led to the back of the house, the way you glance at something that doesn't add up, waiting for it to resolve itself. About an hour later, I went to use the bathroom and passed the door to my grandparents' bedroom. It was slightly ajar. I don't know what made me slow down. The room was dim, curtains drawn. The bed was made, tightly made, the way my grandfather made everything, with military corners, and it was empty, completely undisturbed. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I walked slowly through the rest of the house, the guest room, the small sewing room my grandmother used, the bathroom at the end of the hall. I moved quietly, the way you move when you don't want anyone to hear what you're doing, including yourself. She wasn't anywhere. My grandfather was in the backyard when I came out, standing near the old fence line with his hands in his jacket pockets. He was facing away from me, toward the far end of the property, toward the barn. It had always been there, a big old timber frame structure, maybe 60 yards from the back of the house, dark red paint gone gray at the edges, the kind of barn that had been standing longer than anyone currently alive could remember. Growing up, I'd never had any reason to go in it. My grandfather always said it was for storage, equipment, old things. I walked up beside him and asked, casually, whether my grandmother might have stepped outside for some air. He didn't turn around. "She's fine," he said. "I just want to say hello. She needs her rest. Don't disturb her." The flatness in his voice, no warmth, no elaboration, made something tighten in my chest. I looked at the barn. "You still keeping equipment in there?" I asked. A pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Same as always," he said. I told him I'd go check on the coffee and headed back toward the house. Raina was standing in the doorway watching me. I could tell from her face that she'd been watching the whole exchange. She didn't say anything when I reached her. She just looked past me toward the barn, then back at my face, and whatever she saw there settled something for her. "We're going in there," she said. Not a question. We waited until he came back inside. Then we crossed the yard. The barn door had a simple iron latch, no lock. I lifted it and pulled the door open. The smell reached me first. Not decay exactly, something stiller than that. Something that had been closed up in cold air for days without being disturbed. Sweet and faint and wrong in a way I felt before I understood. The inside was dark, except for thin gray light coming through the slats in the siding. Old tools along one wall, a riding mower, stacked plastic tubs, all the ordinary contents of a life lived long in one place. And against the far wall, a cot, a real cot with a wool blanket pulled up to the chin with a pillow, and on a stool beside it, a glass of water, a small plate with crackers, her Bible, face down, open to somewhere in the middle, like someone had set it aside mid-verse. My brain did what brains do. It tried to make it normal. It told me she had moved out here for space, for quiet, that elderly people sometimes did things like that there was an explanation that would make this ordinary in about 30 seconds. I stood there and let my brain run through every version of normal it could find. Then I saw her hands, folded on top of the blanket, arranged. The particular stillness of them, not the stillness of sleep, but something with more finality in it, reached me before anything else did. Raina made a sound beside me, Not a scream, something quieter and worse than a scream. A single sharp exhale, like something had knocked the air out of her. She grabbed my arm with both hands and held on, and we just stood there in the doorway together, neither of us able to do the next thing yet. Her slippers were on the ground beside the cot, placed neatly, side by side, toes pointed out, the way my grandmother had set her shoes every single night of her life. The rest of that afternoon exists in fragments. Raina taking my phone from my jacket pocket and dialing my mother herself because my hands had stopped working properly. Me sitting down on the cold ground outside the barn without deciding to. My grandfather at the kitchen table when we came back inside, both palms flat on the surface. He talked for a long time, but it didn't come out in a straight line. He said she had passed in her sleep. Then he said she had passed in the evening. Then he said it was early morning. He was almost sure it was early morning, and then he stopped and didn't correct himself either way. He said he brought her out to the barn because the bedroom felt wrong after. He said he brought her out because she always liked the quiet out there, which wasn't something I'd ever heard before and didn't sound true. He said he was going to call someone. He said he'd meant to call someone. He said her name twice in the middle of a sentence and didn't seem to notice he'd done it. He never once said the word died. Not once in all of it. The sheriff came, then the county coroner. Natural causes. Her heart, which had been failing for 2 years. No crime, no investigation. Just an 87-year-old man who had been married for 61 years and could not locate inside himself the first step toward telling anyone she was gone. I've turned it over many times since. I've tried to land on a single feeling about it, and I never quite can. What I keep coming back to isn't the barn or the cold or what I saw when my eyes adjusted to that dim light. It isn't even the smell, which I still catch sometimes in the back of my memory without warning. It's the coffee. He made a full pot that morning. 3 mugs came out of the cabinet, one for me, one for Raina, and one that he set at the far end of the table and never touched and never explained. I didn't notice it at the time. I noticed it later, standing at the sink rinsing mugs while the sheriff walked the property, and by then I already understood. He hadn't set it out for a guest. He'd set it out the way he always had, the way he had every morning for 61 years, without thinking to, without deciding to, just out of the deep, wordless habit of loving someone so long that your hands remember them, even when your mind is trying to forget. 3 mugs. He had set out 3 mugs. The photograph was taken 4 days before we arrived. Someone had been watching the house long before we got there. My name is Daniel. I grew up on my family's farm in rural Tennessee, 40 minutes outside of Cookeville, the kind of place where your nearest neighbor is a 10-minute walk and the dark at night is genuinely dark. I hadn't been back in almost 3 years. When I finally planned the trip, my girlfriend, Mara, wanted to come. She'd grown up in Atlanta, never seen a working farm up close, and thought it sounded like an adventure. We packed the truck on a Friday and left Nashville around 7. We pulled in just after 10. The house was dark. My Uncle James goes to bed at 8 and wakes at 4:30. He left a note on the kitchen table. Dinner in the fridge. Stay out of the lower barn. Lock up. I read it twice. My family had never locked that house, not once in 30 years. I checked the front door, turned the deadbolt, and told myself it was just a new habit. James was already in the kitchen when we came downstairs the next morning. He poured coffee without being asked, shook Mara's hand with both of his, and talked easily about the property, the upper fields, the pond, a black bear that had been circling the tree line for the past few weeks. He said that last part with a pointed look, the kind that offers a simple explanation and quietly discourages follow-up questions. I let myself believe it. But Mara told me later, while we were unpacking after breakfast, that something about the way James moved through the house had unsettled her. Not anything she could name, just that he kept glancing toward the windows, that he never once stood with his back to the door. Around noon, he walked us through the property, upper fields, the equipment shed, the pond, easy and relaxed, talking the whole time. But when we looped back and the lower barn came into view, long, gray, set into a shallow slope about 100 yards from the house, he stopped walking without explanation and turned us in the other direction. Nothing down there worth seeing. He didn't wait for a response. That afternoon, while James napped, Mara and I sat on the porch. She was scrolling through photos she'd taken when she said, very casually, "Your uncle has a lot of cameras." I looked up. She held out her phone. In a photo of the equipment shed, a small black device was mounted high on the corner. She scrolled to another shot, the roof line of the house, another. Standing up and scanning the yard, I counted 4 from where I was sitting alone. My family had never owned security cameras. When James came out around 4, I asked him directly. He looked at me for a half-second too long before answering. Had some trouble, a few months back. Someone coming around at night. Coming around how? He set his mug on the porch railing and fixed his eyes on the lower barn. Going through things, not taking anything far as I could tell, just moving things around. He'd called the sheriff twice. They found nothing. The third time they told him it was probably kids. He said quietly that he didn't think it was kids. That night I woke at 2:14 a.m. to Mara gripping my arm. She was sitting up in bed, very still, staring toward the window. "There's someone outside." I listened. Wind in the cedars, the old house settling, and then footsteps, slow and deliberate in the gravel just below the glass. I moved to the window and looked through the curtain gap. The yard was dark. The motion light near the barn wasn't on. Nothing visible. I stood there longer than I should have had to before going to bed. I didn't sleep again. The next afternoon, while James was out on the north field, I took a flashlight down to the lower barn. The side door was padlocked, but the latch was old and the door gave a few inches under pressure. I shone the light through the gap. Along the interior wall, the full length of the structure, someone had arranged things carefully. A rusted hay hook hung from a nail beside a child's sneaker caked in dried mud. A row of animal bones, cleaned and ordered by size. 3 tin cans filled with dark soil, and tucked into a crack in the wood, a photograph. I pulled it out with 2 fingers. It was a picture of my uncle's house, shot from the tree line at night with a long lens. The kitchen window glowed yellow. 2 silhouettes were visible inside, seated at the table. The timestamp along the bottom edge read 4 days prior. I walked back to the house and locked every door and every window. I sat at the kitchen table until the sun came up. I didn't tell Mara until we were back on the highway the next morning, Nashville already rising ahead of us. I kept my voice even and told her exactly what I'd seen. She didn't speak for a long stretch after I finished. What she finally said was, "Daniel, that picture was taken 4 days ago. We weren't there 4 days ago." I know. My uncle was. The sheriff opened an investigation. Inside the lower barn, behind a rusted tractor, they found a bedroll, protein bar wrappers, and a phone charger plugged into an extension cord buried under the dirt floor, running back toward the house. They found 31 photographs in total, all taken at night, all of the house, spanning nearly 8 months. They never identified who took them. My uncle still lives there. He checks the cameras every morning. He always locks the door now. He told me last month that sometimes late at night the motion light near the lower barn turns on. There's never anything there, but it keeps coming on. It was the summer after our sophomore year college, June, hot and relentless the way only rural Georgia knows how to be. My friend Marcus had been talking for weeks about his grandfather's old farmhouse. The man had passed away in April, left the property to Marcus's dad, and nobody had been out there in months. Marcus pitched it like a getaway. 5 friends, a free house, 60 acres, nothing, no Wi-Fi, no obligations. We were 20 years old, and we said yes before he finished the sentence. There were 5 of us. Marcus, who was the most relaxed human being I've ever known, the kind of guy who could fall asleep in a waiting room and wake up refreshed. Deja, his girlfriend, who brought a ring light on what was essentially a camping trip and felt no shame about it whatsoever. Jordan, who had grown up in Manhattan and genuinely believed rural America was just cities with more trees. Priya, my girlfriend, who packed a first aid kit, 3 flashlights, and bear spray, because Priya believed in preparation the way other people believed in God. And me. 40 minutes into the drive down a dirt road swallowed on both sides by pine trees, Jordan asked if there were bears in Georgia. "Not really," Marcus said. "Not really? What does not really mean?" "It means statistically you're fine." Jordan looked out the window at the pines pressing close on either side and said nothing else for a while. We arrived around 4 p.m. The farmhouse was larger than I'd pictured. White clapboard gone gray with age, a wide wraparound porch, 2 stories, and a detached barn sitting about 60 yards behind it like an afterthought. The land flattened out in every direction, broken only by tree lines far in the distance. The silence was total. Not peaceful, just absent. Marcus had a key. The inside smelled like cedar and old paper, and something underneath both of those things that I couldn't name then and still can't. The furniture was untouched. A wood stove, a braided rug, framed photographs arranged on the walls in no particular order. In one of them, Marcus's grandfather stood in front of the barn with his arms crossed, pale eyes aimed directly at whoever was holding the camera. Not hostile exactly, just watching. Priya started placing flashlights in every room. Jordan found a bottle of bourbon in the kitchen cabinet and held it up like he'd unearthed treasure. Deja asked if we could open a few windows, and Marcus said he didn't see why not. That was the first small thing I noticed and dismissed. The window in the downstairs hallway was already cracked open, an inch, maybe less. I assumed Marcus's dad had been out recently to air the place. I closed it and went back to the kitchen. We ate on the porch as the sun dropped. Deja filmed the sky. Marcus talked about summers here as a kid, catching catfish in the creek, learning to drive a tractor at 9, his grandfather's handshake that could crush a phone book. It was the kind of evening that makes you feel genuinely lucky. I remember thinking, this is exactly what we needed. At 9:47 p.m., I stepped off the porch to find a signal and check my phone. The barn door was open. Not wide, a foot, maybe 18 inches. But I remembered it being closed when we arrived because Priya had walked over and tugged the padlock out of habit, the way she tests stove knobs before leaving a house, and hadn't moved. I got Marcus. He looked at it, said wind, and then I pointed out that the padlock had been on it. We walked out together. The padlock was on the ground, open, shackle unlatched, and the combination hadn't been scrambled. It had been set deliberately to 1107. Marcus went still. "That's your grandfather's birthday," I said. I'd heard it at the funeral. "November 7th, he said quietly. We stood there for a moment, neither of us willing to say what we were both thinking. Then we looked into the barn. Tools, old equipment, a riding mower with flat tires, shelving along the walls, a hayloft above, too dark to see into properly. Nothing moved. We didn't go in. Marcus looped the padlock back through the latch, scrambled the numbers, and we went inside. We told the others. Deja suggested Marcus's dad had probably been out recently and left it unlocked by mistake. That was the explanation that fit, so that's the one we kept. I woke at 2:19 a.m. A sound I couldn't place at first. Low, rhythmic, stopping and starting. I lay still, trying to locate it. Priya was asleep beside me. The room was airless and hot. I got up, went to the window, and looked toward the barn. The door was open again. There was a light inside, faint, amber-colored, the kind that comes from a lantern or a flashlight aimed at the floor. It moved once, slowly, and then held still. I stood there watching it for what felt like a long time. Then I went down the hall and knocked on Marcus's door. He came to it half asleep, and then he wasn't asleep at all. He looked out his window, same view, and I watched the change move across his face. "Go wake Jordan and Priya," he said. His voice was very level. "Don't turn on any lights downstairs. I'm calling 911. I asked him what he thought it was. He didn't answer. He was already dialing. The 22 minutes we waited on that porch were the longest of my life. We sat close together in the dark, not talking, watching that faint light in the barn window. It didn't move much. Whoever was holding it wasn't in a hurry. The canine unit arrived first, the dog already focused before it cleared the car, pulling hard toward the barn without any prompting. The officers didn't go in casually. They stacked at the door the way you see in footage, flashlights sweeping. The dog went in barking, and then the barking stopped, and one of the officers called out clear in a tone that told me whoever had been in there was already gone. What they found in the hayloft: a sleeping bag, a camp stove, food containers, a canteen, a pair of binoculars, and a spiral notepad, college-ruled, roughly half the pages filled in the same small, even handwriting. One of the officers held a page toward me briefly before his partner told him to put it away. I don't know why he did it. Maybe he thought I had a right to know. I've asked myself that question a lot. It was a log, timestamps down the left margin, observations on the right. 2:40 p.m., silver Honda, 5 passengers, 1 female filming arrival on phone. 4:15 p.m., lights on, 2nd floor, east room. 6 p.m., all 5 on porch, 1 male opened liquor, laughing. 9:30 p.m., 2 males approached barn, did not enter. Every line was written the same way, unhurried, precise, the way someone writes when they have nowhere to be and all the time they need. The last entry I saw before the officer pulled it back read, 2:10 a.m., east bedroom, 1 male standing at window. That was 9 minutes before I got up. They never identified him. The investigation stayed open for a while and then quietly didn't. No arrest, no name, no explanation for who he was or how long he'd been using that barn. What I keep coming back to is the first entry in that log. 2:40 p.m., silver Honda, 5 passengers. We arrived at 4 p.m., which means he was already in that hayloft, already writing, an hour and 20 minutes before we pulled up the drive. He knew we were coming. He knew what car we'd be in. He knew there would be 5 of us. We hadn't posted about the trip. No location tags, no stories, nothing public. The people who knew we were going could be counted on one hand. Close friends, a couple of family members, people we trusted without thinking about it, the way you trust the ground under your feet. I've gone through that list more times than I can count. I still don't know which name to land on, but I know it's one of them, and that has changed something in me that I don't think is ever fully going back.